questions from audiences?
Hi, Stefan from FA Albany. I'll ask you a quick, easy one before you get the barrage of interesting questions. Bit of a silly one, but students might be interested. Don Brash had a bit of an outburst the other week about his opinions. Are you guys going to legalise?
In terms of the party's position, so we don't have a party position in favour of the legalisation of cannabis. Don Brash has indicated that he doesn't think that the current approach taken to cannabis is working. All issues in the ACT Party are issues of personal conscience, so we don't actually whip our members on any policies at all, even economic policies. And so you really have to ask people in their individual capacity if they support decriminalisation of cannabis, and I can say that I personally would support legalisation of cannabis, probably more so than decriminalisation.
I had a question come in from Facebook. I think Flosson mentioned about allowances being means tested, but anyone can get a loan. She asked, do you think student loans should be means tested like allowances, and if so, how?
No, I don't think student loans should be means tested. I think there's no need to. It's only necessary to means test student loans at the point that what you're providing is actually just money, which is what our current student loan system does. It's not necessary to means test student loans if it's actually a loan, and that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that it is a loan, so that those considering borrowing are aware of their future obligations, are aware that they'll be paying interest on it, and then there's no need to actually means test access to student loans. On the student allowance issue, I mean, I personally do regard it as slightly unfair that you're essentially treated on the basis of your parents' income, where there's no equivalent rule that says if you're not eligible, then your parents have to finance your tertiary education, and that certainly is unfair. There are no doubt people out there whose parents don't help them a considerable amount, despite the fact that they earn too much. Equally, there are a lot of people who will restructure their affairs to assure that their income is below that, so that their child collects a lot of money, despite the fact that they are in fact wealthy. And I think a lot of research does need to be done around that area to establish whether the student allowance system is actually achieving its stated purpose.
Hi, you've talked about obviously putting interest back onto student loans, and as we know in the previous system it was unfair for women, particularly who don't get paid as much as men, which is a well-known fact, and also stop to have families. So how are we going to combat that to make sure that women aren't being targeted and have extra interest put onto their loans because it takes them longer to repay it?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to realise, much as I said, for example, that in general those who graduate from tertiary education turn out to be wealthier, that's not always the case. And take your example again, okay? So women who drop out of the workforce to have children may struggle to repay their loans more than those who don't. But equally, men who drop out of the workforce will also struggle to repay their loans. So for example, I don't regard that as discriminatory in the same way that I don't regard mortgages as discriminatory. If a woman takes out a mortgage and then drops out of the workforce, she'll struggle to repay her mortgage. But I don't think you'd say that banks discriminate against women by charging equal rates of interest, irrespective of the gender of the people who access those loans. In fact, it would seem to me discriminatory if a bank said women walking through the door get loans at 5% and men get them at 7%. That would be discriminatory, and we certainly have no intention of, when we're restoring interest on student loans, to charge a lower rate on the basis of your gender.
Sorry, just a follow-up question to Kylie's question. So what do you say to the fact that in 2005 the Human Rights Commission actually was prepared to take the ruling that it was discriminatory to court to be settled before Labour, but then Labour got in and changed it to interest-free? So what do you say to dispute the human rights?
Well, okay, let's take two separate issues, okay? In the first place, they can take that claim, that's their responsibility. I think it would be thrown out. I think the court would laugh at the idea that charging people the same amount of interest, regardless of your gender, was discriminatory. But let's put that aside. Let's take the current system. The current system is still just as discriminatory, it just doesn't have an interest component to the loan. If the reality is women earn less than men, you should make them pay less for university. If a woman pays $40,000...
That's misunderstanding.
No, that is a misunderstanding, because ultimately, somebody who does the exact same degree that I do, we will pay the same amount, but by being charged interest on it, if I take on average, I think it was 5 years to pay, 5 years longer to pay, I'm paying more for the exact same qualification that my male counterpart has, because I on average earn 12% to 13% less than my male counterpart.
Exactly, and this is the point that I'm making. If you pay $40,000 to get a qualification, you have a man, you have a woman, they pay the same amount, right? Woman gets paid less than the male. In that case, it's discriminatory according to your logic.
Yes.
You can't do that. So by your own logic, you can't support the current system, and you should support the Human Rights Commission taking a claim. Because how is it fair if women earn less than men that they both have to pay $40,000 for the same degree? That's not fair according to your logic. That's the implication of your logic. I'm sorry, I'm just spelling it out. If you want to adopt the position that that's unfair, that's fine. You're being consistent. But I just want you to be consistent. The approach we take is consistent. All I'm asking is consistency from you guys on this.
I have a question, Stephen. The reality, despite all your high-flying principles, the reality of it is that fees and student debt are a barrier to education, and are particularly a barrier to people from low socioeconomic backgrounds, and that the policies that your party and what you said today are espousing will lock out people from low socioeconomic backgrounds from accessing tertiary education, because fees will simply be perceived as too high and the return on investment too low. And so the idea that the subsidy somehow takes money from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and subsidises rich people is incorrect, and you know that because graduates pay by far the most tax anyway. And I don't see why we need to concentrate incidents of paying that back in a short period after you've graduated, if you can spread it out, because graduates pay more tax anyway.
Yeah, and so let's take that last claim first. So as I said, you're right, you can spread it out over the course of someone's life. The question that I'm asking you is, I would happily exchange 5% interest on my loan for a 5 percentage point lower tax rate over the course of my life. That would be amazing. That would be the best outcome for me ever. And it would even be better if it was a 2 percentage point cut on my salary. Why? Because my loan's $45,000. If I earn at least over the course of my life more than $150,000, a 2 percentage point lower tax rate is better for me. And it's better for most graduates as well, because they don't end up paying higher taxes as a result of a policy that has high levels of government expenditure to fund the tertiary education system. Let's take your other claim. So your other claim was that fees and high fees are a barrier to education for minority groups and those who are poor. So let's test that claim against the reality. Did more Maori receive private tertiary education now under a system of fees, or 30 years ago when entrance requirements to universities were particularly high and Maori received a substantially lower quality of secondary education? The reality is more minority groups and those on lower incomes go to tertiary education as a result of a fee-paying system than one which says universities should be free, but because we can't afford it, we're lifting the requirements to get into university. And that's the reality. In regards to, is there a role for government to ensure that those who do regard a student loan as a significant barrier to provide scholarships, for example, to those on low incomes? Yes, there probably is a role for the government there, and that's why I said we weren't against the student allowance system per se, but we do think it's important to ensure that it's targeted at those who need it. Equally, I wouldn't be averse to paying those who have low incomes or who have had very few opportunities in their life to get, for example, a quality secondary qualification, but it should be targeted towards those. Our current education system, tertiary education system, is not targeted on that level, and that's the basis on which we oppose it.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Sam.
What was, I mean, in New Zealand, we're not producing enough teachers, we're not producing enough doctors, we're not producing enough nurses, we're not producing enough people with inside apprenticeships that have more sort of practical skills, so that in the end we rely a lot on immigration to fill up that slack there. So what would ACT do to tertiary education and its policies there to encourage more people to become teachers, for example, or any of the ones I just listed?
Right. Well, as regard our tertiary education policy, as regard the shortages of labour, for example, if there is a shortage of teachers in New Zealand, then obviously it's important that we attract teachers somehow, either through higher wages for teachers or by encouraging more of them to go through university. But to be honest, I don't actually care where teachers come from, provided that they're qualified. If you're a teacher who's trained overseas, who wants to teach in New Zealand, is willing to accept those wages, I don't think we should try and train New Zealand teachers. I don't think we should have a preference for people who happen to be born in this country over those who were born elsewhere. And so I don't regard that as an important issue, provided there aren't shortages in those particular areas.
Okay, well, that's all the time we have for you. Thank you very much for coming. Well spoken, and good luck in Wellington Central.
Okay.